Some metro systems have a reputation for being clean as a whistle. Others, I'm looking at you, New York City, have reputations for being subterranean cesspools. We get it. With 58 billion annual rides taken, the world's subway systems are bound to host some germs, even in the cleanest trains and stations. And in the dirty ones, it's frightening to think about what could be festering in there. But more than a few scientists have studied the microbial environments of subways, and they've made some fascinating discoveries about the differences between them. So hold on tight and stand clear of the closing doors. You're about to learn what's riding along with you on the subway. Listen, microbes are everywhere, and you're picking up a bunch when you ride the T or L or the underground or whatever you want to call it. We know because scientists in Mexico City swabbed passengers' hands before and after they rode the metro. By the end of the trip, the assortment of microbes they collected was more diverse than at the start. So you're picking up quite a variety of germs. And you're getting them from the guy down the car picking his nose, or maybe from the lady who shared a section of her newspaper with you instead. Based purely on vibes, I'd rather have her bacteria all over me. But based on science, we know that after a ride, the swabbed passengers' microbial milieu ended up looking a lot more like their fellow commuters' microbes. And it's not just a Mexico City thing. One of the most famous studies on metropolitan microbes was set in the New York City subway system, one of the oldest and busiest in the world. It's one of only a handful of systems globally that runs 24/7 and has a long-standing reputation for being gross. Yes, I am picking on New York, but we have a lot of complexly staff who live in New York, and so I am saying this with love. Even the senior author of the New York study was worried about how gross it might be. He said he was inspired to discover the microbial underbelly of the city that never sleeps when he caught his young daughter licking a New York City subway pole and was understandably concerned for her health. So he and his team got to work swabbing more than 1,000 benches, turnstiles, handrails, and other places in every single subway station in the Big Apple. They collected tiny bits of microbial DNA and then ran it through a process called sequencing. First, you identify the order of A's, T's, G's, and C's and parts of that DNA. Then you run that sequence through a database to see if it matches known organisms. And they got more than a few matches. I'll start with the good news. Of the top 10 most common bacterial species they found, most were bacteria usually found on skin or in soil. None of them normally cause disease in humans, although several can cause infections in people who are already sick or have had a weakened immune system. So maybe New York City deserves a little more credit for their relatively harmless subway microbiome, but New Yorkers weren't the only ones interested in the microscopic stowaways of their transit systems. Researchers studying the T in Boston found microbes all over that system too. But they noticed that the type of surface, like a hand grip versus a bench, was the biggest determinant of what kind of microbes would be there. Hanging grips close to face level had more oral microbes, and seats had more vaginal-associated microbes. And before you raise too much concern over what goes on in Boston Transit, those researchers pointed out that vaginal-associated microbes can be transmitted through clothing. So you can end up with different microbes from riding with different people and from coming into contact with different surfaces. But scientists in Shanghai found that microbes in the air at subway stations can also vary with the seasons. In their study, about 500 bacterial species were only detected during the springtime, and more than 6,000 were only found in the summer. Meaning there's no one subway microbe. Every trip has a different bunch of microscopic passengers along for the ride. But for the most part, the microbes come from us, and importantly, researchers haven't found a ton of pathogens, or germs that make you sick. Although, note that I said they didn't find a ton of pathogens. It wasn't unheard of for them to be lurking. But overall, things are looking a lot less scary for public transit users than you might have worried about when we started this episode. And on top of helping us all sleep easy at night, these microbes are telling some pretty cool stories about their specific neighborhoods. But before we can talk about all that, all science needs funding, including ours. So here's an ad.
Thanks for watching this SciShow video. And thanks for supporting us on SciShow by commenting, sharing, and joining us on Patreon. There's a lot of online ways to keep fact-checked information, like what you find in these videos, around. And now there's a way to do that in person too. Complexly, the 501c3 nonprofit that makes SciShow, PBS Eons, Crash Course, Bizarre Beasts, and more, is holding our very first benefit. It's called Something Worth Knowing, and it's live at the Wilshire Ebell Theater in Los Angeles, California on September 16th, 2026. This first ever Complexly in-person event is a fundraiser to support our mission of inspiring curiosity and lowering barriers to knowledge building. Because curiosity builds understanding, and understanding builds a better world. You can get your ticket at somethingworthknowing.org. See you there.
In one publication summarizing 60 cities worth of swabbing and sequencing, each city had its own unique microbial fingerprint determined by which species were found there and in what amounts. Those researchers identified more than 4,000 different kinds of microbes, and most of them were specific to less than a quarter of the samples. That means part of each city's microbial fingerprint comes from some super regional microbes. Each fingerprint was so distinct that a machine learning algorithm could accurately identify cities based on microbial data. And that's even more impressive when you consider how much of the city's microbiome still overlapped. More than 97% of the samples contained the same 31 bacterial species. They might not have been the most common microbes in each city, but they did show up in almost every single one. Those 31 bacteria formed what the researchers call the core urban microbiome, shared across places as diverse as Singapore, Rio de Janeiro, London, Barcelona, and Denver. About half of those core microbes are known to hang out with humans, like some that cause acne, some that cause dental plaque, and others that make your feet stink. These include staph and strep, which might sound scary, but there are lots of bacteria in those families that don't typically make people sick. And even the ones that do usually only cause problems under specific conditions. The other half of the core microbes were bacteria commonly found in the environment. They tend to be harmless to you and me, but can cause serious infections if, say, you manage to get some in contact with a catheter inside your body, which is unlikely to happen on the subway. I just had to mention that they're not totally harmless. And then there are the weird ones. The microbe researchers found extremophiles that live in and around rocks and can survive conditions that make other microbes shake in their tiny boots, if they had them. I'm talking about exposure to heavy metals, ionizing radiation, and UV light. And yes, all of these species tell a story. You know how Sherlock Holmes can see flecks of mud on someone's clothes and know exactly where they've been? Now that microbial fingerprints have been established for so many major cities, we might have a higher tech version of that. By sequencing the microbes on someone's clothes or shoes, detectives might be able to figure out where they've been. Another helpful hint these microbes give us is in relation to antimicrobial resistance. When pathogens evolve workarounds to the chemicals we use to eliminate them, they can end up becoming superbugs that are very hard to kill. This often happens when people misuse antibiotics, like taking them when you don't actually have a bacterial infection or not finishing your complete course. At that point, you're just giving a competitive advantage to bugs with mutations that allow them to survive the antibiotic. So it's not great if we find a bunch of antimicrobial resistance in our global subway microbiome, but at least we'd know what we were up against. And when it comes to knowing what we're up against, this survey of subway microbiomes was super helpful. It identified almost 11,000 viruses that aren't in databases, meaning we may never have seen them before. We're learning about a totally new world of subway microbes, and they could turn out to be good guys that only infect and kill harmful bacteria. So yes, they uncovered a giant amount of microbes in our subway systems, but no, you don't need to be that worried about getting sick from riding public transit. Remember, the overwhelming majority of microbes identified in subway systems are not microbes known to cause disease in humans, but rather microbes that are already living in and on human bodies without making us sick. But for those that do make us sick, a study published in 2020 across 121 US cities investigated if riding public transit was associated with influenza and pneumonia deaths. Those researchers compared the death rates from those causes to the percentage of people in that city who use public transit. If public transit were a major cause of disease spread, they figured that cities with high proportion of transit users would have the highest number of deaths. But they didn't. In fact, New York City, which had the highest rate of public transit users at 57% of the population over age 16, was among the 10 cities with the lowest rate of influenza and pneumonia deaths. Despite the close quarters, the authors think transmission was lessened by typical practices like not talking to or touching strangers when you can help it. And a simulation of an influenza epidemic in New York City predicted that only 4.4% of all transmission would happen on the subway, compared to 30% of transmission at home and 24.5% at school. Those are the places you probably spend more of your time anyway. So nasty viral infections don't seem to be super associated with riding the subway in general. general. But the giant caveat to that statement is that there's only so much we can learn from DNA sequencing. A DNA sequence alone can't tell us whether a microbe was even alive at the time of sampling. After all, DNA is a remarkably stable molecule, so it can stick around long after the organism it belongs to is dead. But even if the microbes are alive, sometimes that's a good thing too. Many studies have shown that exposing children to microbes early in life is really important for training a healthy immune system and might even prevent issues like allergies and asthma later on in life. For adults, those microbes can also become part of a healthy microbiome where there is often strength and diversity. So if you, like that researcher's kid, licked a subway pole, it seems pretty unlikely you'd get sick. But keeping your hands and arms inside the car and your tongue inside of your mouth is still probably a good idea as you zip around the city.